Hey, Paul. How's it
Hey
going?
Fab, good you.
Good, good. You've been wanting to talk about role plays and simulations, apparently, which is really interesting. I know you've posted on LinkedIn about it. We've talked about it on the show before. We've
Yep,
actually had some live role plays where you would kind of role play with me, like cold calls and stuff like that in the earlier episodes,
yep.
and which is really fun. I think. I think it's worth bringing back up as a topic. I think there's something there, and I think, I mean, just again, as an ops person looking from the outside in, it's something that's not done a lot, right? We put a lot of, I see a lot of sales leaders putting a lot of focus on trainings and books in some cases, and data and stuff like that to help the team improve. But at the end of the day, you're saying role plays is kind of a key ingredient to
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously in what I do, I've done a lot of consulting. You build processes, you build strategy, you train people, you do a whole bunch of things. But really, sales wise, tactically speaking, as a sales leader, the most important thing you can do to make your people get better at what they do is make them practice. And the best way to practice is role plays. And it's
Yeah.
that simple. And a lot of people, I don't know, I think what happens is a lot of people are uncomfortable with it. But as a salesperson, if you say, oh, yeah, I want to learn, I want to move forward, but I don't want to do role play, then you don't want to learn and you don't want to move forward. And that's
Yeah.
the indicator. You got to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to fail.
Yeah. I think what, I mean, again, from what I've seen is that it's just not in the repertoire of things you can do to improve, right? Like when you read a lot of sales help tips online, like I've never seen, or rarely, let's put it rarely, never say never, rarely seen role plays as a way for leaders to help their team improve. I just think it's just not in the common advice that I've seen out there.
It isn't, and it's unfortunate because it's a big gap. It's the gap that people don't realize needs to be filled to really get that training to be absorbed.
Yeah.
There's no better way, And some people call it coaching too, like they'll coach you, and that's true. Coaching is definitely important, but
Yeah.
I see role play as both a tool to training and to coaching.
Mm.
It's the way to see, you talk to someone and they say, oh yeah, I understand. And you say, okay, well, show me how you do it. Right. You'll do that if you're teaching someone how to to build a guitar, they'll watch you, they'll try it a little bit and then they'll say, okay, you do it. Right. And in sales, the you do it normally happens when you're in front of the client, which is probably the stupidest thing to do, because then you mess up and then your boss says, oh, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. And you're like, oh, yeah. I was trying to think of all that. Last thing you need to be doing while you're doing a sales call is to think about all the things you should be doing. You should
Yeah.
just know them instinctively. And the way to do that is to role play them and practice them. So,
Yeah. Because like ultimately that's one of the beauties of it, right? Is that you're in a live situation without being in a live situation, right? And
yeah,
what's nice about it, I mean, these are just the examples that we've done together like a long time ago on the podcast, is that you can, as a leader, you can simulate the experience that you want your rep to have, right? The easy client, like, or the
yeah,
easy prospect, or the easy discovery call, like whatever you're role playing on, and the difficult one. And you could go dive deep on specifics in your industry, like somebody that doesn't want to share XYZ data that you absolutely need, or stuff like that. And I think that's what's nice, is that it's almost like a little experiment, right? You're kind of
yeah,
working with a rep in a safety bubble, but you can really, and you could go to the extreme, right? Like the extremely difficult prospect, so that when they encounter like a mildly
oh,
difficult prospect,
yeah.
they're more equipped for that.
It's not you should, it's not you could, it's you have to, because in sales, you and I both know, we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
You're going to fail more than you're going to be successful. So in your role plays, you got to set up failures.
Yeah.
You got to get times where, if it's a simple one call close where the person's not going to answer or not get back to you or not at all be responsive to what you're saying, that's part of life. That's part of the
Yeah.
reality of what's going on. But
Okay.
before we go there, there's a few things if you don't mind, I'd like to one thing that's really important is you got to have rules to the role play.
But wait. Let's before we start going left, right, and center. Let's try to follow our structure. And so, we talked about what role play is, but normally, like as a sales leader, what are you expecting your salespeople to do within a role play environment?
So you're expecting, as a sales leader and as a salesperson, I mean, this is applicable to everyone, as a sales
Yeah,
leader and as a salesperson. When you're doing role play, or when let's say you're doing a role play session, you should be focusing on a very specific part of your sales process. Most
yeah,
sales processes are more than 5 or 10 minutes long, and I don't think a role play should ever surpass 10 minutes, because then it's too hard to go back and take notes on what you did right and what you didn't do right. So break up your sales process into chunks and practice the different parts of your sales process. It can be the introduction, it can be the discovery, it can be the confirmation, it can be the presentation, it can be the close, it can be the after sale, whatever it is, just practice. And you could practice sub parts of that, because we all know that discovery can take, in certain cases, discovery can be an hour. So maybe
yeah,
you
or
can do a
more,
little
multiple
snippet.
hours, multiple
Yeah.
hours of calls.
Correct. And to
Yeah, I
make it
mean, what I would,
realistic, you have to break it down, because if you're trying to do the whole sales, what normally would take you 5 days and you're doing it in 15 minutes, then it's not a realistic sales role. Role
no, and
play
I
is
think that's what it
totally
would
in.
be like as a sales leader would do like some role playing. Like that's what I would expect from my sales team is like, to take it seriously. I think there's maybe a connotation also sometimes role play. You kind of feel maybe it's more of a childish operation type of thing. Like I would say, I would expect my salespeople to like, take this exercise seriously, and I would even consider like putting them, because depending on how mature your salesperson is, right, is sales can be an uncomfortable thing, right? Especially if you're cold calling and not a lot of people are uncomfortable cold calling. I would try to make them live that experience, like maybe do a role play, in front of the team, right? That becomes
Well,
uncomfortable,
here, so
right?
let's back up a second, because that I want to talk about the rules of role play first, because that's
Okay.
really important. If you're getting people to do role play in front of the team, there's a few rules to role plays which are really important. The first thing is it's a safe environment, right? When you're
Yeah.
doing a role play, there's no judgment. What do I mean by that? You're going to talk about the things you did right and you did wrong, but you're not judging the human being on what they did. In other words, you're not going to get fired because you screw up in a role play. And
Right.
if as a leader you are judging people when they do role play, you'll never get them to do role plays again. And you're going to
Right.
instill fear. If you say to them, wow, you really screwed that up, I hope you don't do that in front of the client, forget it. You're a horrible leader, one, and you're never going to help your people move forward. So if you're going to denigrate or drag them down, that's wrong. So, first thing, it's a safe zone. The
Yeah.
other thing that's important is, if you're doing regular role plays as a leader, don't always be the client, be the salesperson and show them that you're human. You
Yeah.
know, you can screw up too. So that's very important. So all people should play all roles, very important. No
Yeah, I
longer,
like that because
yeah,
um, it's quote unquote easy to be the client, right? It's easy. Like, okay, obviously you wouldn't prepare too much. Like it's easy. Okay, I'm going to be difficult now, just to be difficult. Like I think it's harder to be the rep in the role play, and I think it's really nice as a sales leader to show not necessarily that you have the most experience, but yeah, like you said, to show that you're human and that you're a leader and you're willing to be quote unquote embarrassed in front of the team,
yeah,
right?
and I think you need to mess up too. Like it needs to be that if you need to tell your people, hey, I mess up too, because you don't close everything. You didn't close everything if you were ever in sales, and if you weren't in sales and you're somehow in sales leadership, say, I've never done this, but I should also experience what my reps do. So
Yeah,
that
and I think the rep can also bring in an interesting perspective, right? Because, like you said, whether you've been in sales or not as a leader, you might be a little removed at this point. Maybe you're
yeah,
hopping on just on
yeah,
important calls at
exactly.
best. Where salespeople are they're in the trenches like daily on their phone, on their calls, and on their Zooms. So I
They may
think they
be way
might
better
bring
than
up,
you. Yeah, they may
yeah,
be way better than you at doing those role plays. That's okay.
right. Because you might be thinking about when you were a rep like 10 years ago. Like, obviously, the world's changed so much in 10 years. So you're kind of bringing up some objections that might not really be real, or you're forgetting some objections,
Yeah.
like, well, that's not what your marketing person said on LinkedIn. And you're like, well, like you might not think of that, but your rep might have heard that and bring that up in a role play situation.
Absolutely. So those rules are important, like to play both sides and that it's a safe zone. The other rule is that when you're doing a role play in front of a lot of people, because you mentioned that, that's what made triggered this thought, is that if there's a lot of people around, so the person who does the plays the client should obviously be the first, not obviously, but after the role play is done, should be the first person to comment on how they felt and how they may have done something better. So you give them a chance to change anything that they would have done. They might verbalize it. And then the person who played the client should make their comment second. And then after that, you want the spectators to give their clients. It can't just be spectators watching you. They have to say something. And the rules of saying something should always be say something positive first, and then say something that you think might be able to be improved upon. Not to hurt them, but to say, hey, look, if you thought of doing this. And what most people are going to realize is once you are in the role play, it's a lot harder to do everything that you think you should do, right? Because you're actually actively engaging in a conversation. So if all you're thinking about in the role play is, oh, what should I be saying next and doing this wrong or doing that wrong, it's because you're not ready or as ready as you should be in the real world, because it should come to you more naturally. And that's why you need to role play to get to a point where what you need to do in your sales process comes much more naturally because it's ingrained, because you've learned it. Like you've gone out and done those slap shots, you've gone skiing, you practiced, you've tried what you need to do before you go in and play the game. The equivalent of a sales call is like you're playing that big game. Well, you better have practiced before you go play that game, or you better practice before you build a house. You don't say this is how it's done, then you go out and build a house. So those are the rules of the role play that are really important. But the other thing is keep it short and make it fun. Laugh. Encourage people to laugh. Encourage people to do fun things. Sorry, I'm yapping my brains out. Yes, go ahead. Comments, Fab.
No, I'm liking this. This is really practical stuff. Like I think, and what have you seen? Kind of like, is it or seen, or what do you advise? Like, is it better to do kind of a weekly role playing moment with the team? Like, let's say you have a weekly stand up. I mean, normally you might have multiple stand ups, or is it better to just do kind of like a quarterly thing? Like, I'm seeing it more of a weekly reality, especially in a world. I mean, obviously depending on the industry you're in, but if we look at the tech space, where there's a lot of changes, budgets are getting a lot tighter, clients are a little bit more weary of spending money, and so on and so forth. I could see that as being such a great moment to, especially if you're adding that short and fun component to it, right? Because you're living a stressful situation if you're in a sector that's contracting at the moment and it's changing a lot. So you're adding that fun element, but you're also teaching your team live, quote unquote, on how to deal with the reality going on. There's also, and I guess there's also a team learning.
Yes, well, that's what I was going to say.
Right?
So the group role play is amazing because you get so many good comments from people afterwards. Doing a role play in front of a group is an amazing. And I also like the group role play. What do I mean by that? Where you say to people, okay, you're going to have one client, and you say to whoever's in the room, if there's 4 or 5 reps, okay, if you have a good question, jump in. And usually those are great learning sessions because people learn from each other their best practices. And wonderful things come out of there. So group role plays, and I experienced this last week in a training session with a group, and it was amazing. Now, here's what I want to say. The first time you establish role plays, people are going to hate it because everyone's afraid to be put out there. It's like the first person that goes on the dance floor. But once you've populated the dance floor, usually most people want to go dancing. So it's the same sort of analogy. But for sure, Fab, you're totally right. Your instinct's right on that one. Well, it's not your instinct. I know you know this. Role plays should happen on a frequent basis. And what I say to people too is, I often say, make it fun. When you're practicing role plays, call someone up and say role play and do a 2-minute role play. That you should be doing every day. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Because you could also do one-on-one role plays. Like, you don't necessarily need to have the whole team around.
Yeah,
like it's probably like I could see this as like, let's say you have your daily meetings or whatever with your team, or a meeting with a team member because they're about to, they're planning a big discovery session with like a potentially important client. Like, I could see how a role play might be a better way for them to prep the call than to, sit through you blabbing about like all the things you shouldn't forget. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think that's very important because I often, usually when I do role plays, the first thing people say, they say, well, I would have said this and I would have said that. I said, okay, I don't want to hear what you would have said. Let's say it to me.
Yeah.
And then usually it's way more efficient in getting the message across. Because
Yeah.
if you're dissecting what you'd say in a call, it can take you a half an hour to talk about a 3 minute call. If you just do the 3 minute call, I'm going to see what you do in the 3 minute call.
Yeah.
And you'll probably mess up. And I say to people, you're going to be way worse in your role play than you are in real life because you're nervous and you haven't done it yet. And that's okay. And that's
Yeah.
okay. That's all part of it's all part of the process. And
Cool.
so, and the last thing I'd say is that you don't know how good you are till you actually do it. So if I say, Fab, okay, I want you to ask me 3 open-ended questions, listen to what I had to say, and then continue in that open mind. And then they'll say, well, I'd say this. And I say, no, go for it. And most people mess up the first time until it becomes instinctive, like riding a bicycle. Then you're thinking, you're listening to the person, you've trained yourself to ask open-ended questions. Next thing you know, wow, you get really good at it. And that by the end of the session, you're asking way more open-ended questions because you've role played it.
Right.
Sound like a preacher. Go to church and role play.
No, I mean, I like it because you're bringing up a lot of good points, right? Because I think like one-on-one sessions with sales teams can be tedious, right? Like not everybody wants to do it, or like if you're doing a pipeline review, so it's kind of tedious, not always the most interesting stuff for the leader too, right? Some leaders might like it, but some leaders might be like, ugh, and I think like adding in this quote unquote fun component, but that's also quite useful, and if anything, according to you, like most useful. I think that makes your one-on-one and your team meetings a lot more interesting, and I think I have a feeling that your reps would appreciate it in the long run, especially a more junior rep, I would assume, because they get to also learn from their more senior team members, right? Like if you have a rep that just started last week and they're in a room with very senior reps that have been at the company for 2, 3, 4, 10 years, and you're doing the role play, and obviously you're in the hot seat, you're the rep. You get so much good feedback.
Yeah,
Which you never would get in any other situation, right? Like
exactly.
there's no way. I mean, yeah, maybe you can ask somebody advice, but getting advice from somebody is very different than like blank advice. Like, hey, how do what do you say when you answer a call? And you're going to have like 15 different answers. But when you're in a role play situation, you're going to get real feedback based on what you've just been through.
And if you look at the any exactly, you get the feedback right away. It gets you to move forward. And if you look at any learning pyramid, people learn way more from doing than they do from listening, right? So if you
Yeah.
learn something, you heard it, and then you put it into practice, you're going to absorb it a lot better.
Yeah.
I know you play drums, so think of the first time you tried to play any song. You hear a Led Zeppelin song, you're trying to repeat the beat, and then you say, "Oh, I can do that," and you sit down and you think you're doing it, and then you listen back to what you recorded. You're going, "Wow, that doesn't sound at all like John Bonham." Right? So then
That's exactly
so
what
that
it
was
sounds
your
like when I
role
sing in the
play, and then you're
shower.
trying to figure out, well, how exactly. So then you say, okay, what is it I can fix? What is it? So what you're going to do is you're going to practice till it gets better. It's the same thing
Yeah.
in sales.
Cool.
It's the most important tool. I don't think there is a more important tool. And you've said it very well. You can learn, and it's a very important point that you learn so much from the expertise around you. And when you live through it, you're so much more attuned to what's going on, and you'll listen to that positive criticism so much more after you've put yourself on the spot.
Yeah. And so you kind of you made it difficult a bit for me on the operationalization
Sorry,
front with
Fab.
this topic, but that's okay. I think I would actually give two pieces of advice, for operations teams or sales leaders working with their operations team. I think one is like it's pre-role play. I think you need to be very aware of your data in terms of sales success. If you're saying this is a key ingredient to sales success, you need to have your metrics that identify. So you can say like, oh, Paul's really seems to be struggling all of a sudden with booking his discovery calls. Let's use role play. Let's to
Yes.
identify what's going on. And so I would say there's a kind of use your CRM and your data to identify moments that you need to be role playing. So maybe Paul's having a hard time booking discovery calls. Maybe Fab's having a hard time, quote unquote, closing, or maybe Lucy's having a hard time, getting her cold calls answered.
God, forget having a hard time. What about they just want to increase their numbers, right? Let's
Yeah,
say Lucy's got good discovery, but let's increase her percentages by 2%. How can we do it? Role
yeah.
play.
And I think that's where your CRM comes in super handy, because otherwise there I could see that there would be a risk of role playing, quote unquote, the wrong things. Obviously there's never too much practice of anything, right? But if Paul's great at booking discovery calls and you look at his numbers, he's number one on the team, and you're role playing booking a discovery call with Paul, it might be a great learning opportunity for others around listening. But like there may be something else that we can role play with you versus with Lucy or Fab or whoever, right? So
Yeah,
I think that's where I would focus a lot of the operationalize, is making sure your data's on point to be able to identify the moments that you want to role play on and simulate
yeah.
on. That
Now
would be
that
number one.
being
And then if you want to move it to the next level, I would
okay,
what I would think of doing is, in HubSpot, it's not like, maybe I'm getting a bit technical, but it's like I would build a custom object for my rep in my CRM so that I can track kind of their success over time over variable metrics. And then you can then build reports on, like, how well is Paul doing with this type of, like, oh, we need to upgrade this type of, and you can build these really interesting reports to see, like, how they progress over time based on specific characteristics that you would be want them to role play on. So I think that would be, and I get that's maybe a bit more conceptual, but I think there's something really interesting there of, like, tracking somebody's progress and then comparing it to actual sales success.
yes, that's where I realized That's where I realized you're
Yes.
the Albert Einstein of CRMs. No, I understand what you're saying. So then you're creating something that tracks exactly how your role play and your success rate goes. Now,
Yeah.
one thing I do want to say at the end, though, it's very very important, is don't ever create a role play competition. Don't ever say, "Well, you're the best person at role play," because then you're going to make people
No.
insecure about wanting to do it. It's a
No,
learning
and that
tool.
goes back to being a safe space, right? It's not a
Correct.
competitive space. And I
Yeah.
get sales is often a competitive environment to be in, like, and we often play on that to motivate salespeople, like who's the leader, who's, and so on and so forth. But I think that's a place where that kind of goes all out the window for a
Yep.
moment, right?
Yep.
Because
And
at the
my
end of the day,
analogy.
I know F1 is starting next week, so we're going to bring back F1 analogies, right? Like, you have these two drivers and they want to both be number one and they're competing against each other. But as a leader, your goal is to make the team successful, right?
Yes.
And so
Yep.
that's what you're trying to do. And the role play is about making the team successful by making each one better. But you got to make sure they're not competing against each other
And
at that
F1's
point.
a great example. They're role playing all the time. That's all
Yeah.
they do. And
Yeah.
they even go to the gym before they role play. You know what I mean? They go
Yeah.
in and they work out and they do everything they can. It's not just, well, I'll see how I drive today.
No, no. And
I know what I'm
they have
doing.
their,
And yeah,
they have their simulators, and they have, like, everybody practices. Every athlete in the world that's at a professional
and
level
and Fab, they have
practices
their
constantly.
CRM, right? Because they have all the data
Yeah,
tracking exactly what's going on, and then they know what to work on, what to role play on. So it's a great
yeah.
analogy, Fab. I love it.
Thank you. All right, I want to be
Um,
mindful for time. I have to kind of log off in a few
one
minutes because I
last
have
thing.
something else. Yep.
Think of the role play. The whole encounter is like a sandbox. It's safe. You're playing in the sandbox, and the difference, but it's a sandbox without cat poop in it. So
Ah,
there's no crap going on. There's no negative stuff going on. It's where you get to express yourself and put out all the negative stuff. You're not trying to
cool.
compete. So great.
Well, I
Thanks.
think that's a good segue. I'd like to close off on kind of my top takeaways. Maybe
Yes.
let me know if you have anything to change or add. So I think the big one, like you just mentioned and you just kind of ended on, is the safe environment. It's a sandbox. Sales can be very competitive place to work in, but the role play is a safe space, and there you're really there to help each other out as team members. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's just improvement, right? I think that's kind of one of the biggest key takeaways. I think one thing that you said that I liked was also change roles as a leader, right? Or
Yeah.
even as a rep, make sure that your rep is not always the rep, and make sure that your rep is not always dealing with a difficult client, and so on. And so I think it's important to change roles
Yeah.
in the role play. I like also your commenting order, right? Where, like, the person
Yep.
who's playing the rep comments first, the person that's playing the client
Yep.
comments second, and then the rest of the team, if there is one, if it's a group situation,
Yep.
comments third. And I like that you're kind of sandwiching using the sandwich compliment, right? Like positive, maybe something to improve, close with a positive, because again, it is a safe environment, and you don't want the person being in the role play feel that they're being attacked, right? When you're
Correct.
just going
Yeah.
criticism, criticism, criticism. You had a lot of good stuff. I still have takeaways. Let's keep going. Keep it short and fun. I like that one. I think that's, again, going back to the safe space. Sales can be a stressful environment to be in, so having like these moments of fun throughout your week that are also useful are key. And realize that it's a team learning experience, right? There's you in the role play, but there's also all the people around you, right? If you're doing it in front of everybody, because you can have very senior reps contributing and sharing their insights, and they're third in terms of sharing comments, but I think there's value there too, and the rest of the team can learn. I was talking to a neighbor who's like in a hockey program, and he's like, you learn so much from seeing how the coach works with others, right? Like, it's not just, yeah, you learn when the coach is trying to coach you, but you learn from
Yeah,
like
in
what
a group
others are.
setting, yeah, exactly. You hear the other coaching, oh, like something you hadn't even thought of, and it helps you. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And operationally, I think it's just make sure your data is clean, because that'll help instruct like what kind of coaching needs to be done with whom at which moment. I think that's a big one.
Yeah,
And bring it to the next level and add it to your reporting to track success. I would say, but I think the big one is making sure your data is clean, so you can identify true coach moments that need to be coached and role played.
yeah. Very, very well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Anything
do,
else to add?
there's one takeaway, something that I didn't mention, that I'll throw it into a takeaway is remember to role play. In making it fun, don't always role play in your industry. Role play outside of your industry to practice your sales skills and not your technical
Mm,
skills.
oh, that's good. Yeah, like try to sell like a commodity product, even though you're like a highly technical
Well, what I would say is, let's say you're
whatever.
selling a highly technical IT service. Maybe you could be selling medical equipment instead. And if you're pharma, maybe you can try selling, you know, manufacturing, manufacturing uh, services. Just something that's outside of your field. It doesn't need to be more simple or more complex. Something equally complex to what you do, but outside of your field, so that you're focusing on the sales aspect, particularly in the discovery area, rather than pushing your wares. Um,
Fair.
but then we're going to fall into sales training. So yes, so that's why I say just role play outside your industry. It'll help you
Yeah,
get.
no, that's a good one, right? Because otherwise, yeah, you there is a risk that you get into the technical component of
Yeah,
like you're selling your product specifically as opposed to selling skills, which is really what we're trying to get to
exactly,
here. Yeah.
exactly. Fab, you're so.
Paul,
I don't even need to
uh,
role play this with you. You got it.
or do I? Paul, this has been fun.
Yep.
As always, this is a good topic. We'll see you not next week, but the week after.
Perfect. All right. See you guys in 2 weeks. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.